Hey everybody, and welcome to the next part of the Menat guide. So, first of all, I want to cover block strings for Menat. Now, Menat is a zoning archetype of a character, which means that she isn't going to have extensively long block strings outside of her V-Trigger 1, at least. So, usually, what you're going to want to do is find ways to trap your opponent, and I'm going to explain that in a second, to force them to make mistakes, and that's how you're going to get the bulk of your damage. So let's start off with a simple string from stand light kick her 3 frame, and this one is one of my favorites. So it's stand light kick, crouch light kick, crouch light punch. So you see, simple, leaves you a +2 after the crouch light punch, right? Why do we use this string? Well, for one, you use stand light kick as the starter, and then if they're walking back, crouch light kick will hit them, crouch light punch will then follow up, and if you have critical art, you can combo into the critical art as a cancel. So it's really good for catching walkbacks, but it also can be used to set up a drill. So immediately after that crouch light kick, crouch light punch, stand light kick, crouch light punch, I'm gonna do jump forward drill, and you can see I got a +5 drill like that. So I like to set up my drills a lot of the times by using strings that can auto space me to do specific drills so that I get plus setups, like so. So what are we gonna do next? We're gonna show off the Soul Sphere block strings that Menat has, because they differ a lot. So I'm gonna show you again of the 3 lights: crouch light kick, crouch light punch, stand light kick, crouch light punch, heavy Soul Sphere. And as you can see, it's -1. But at this range, your opponent won't be able to do anything about that. And if they do try to press a button, you can probably frame trap them with sweep, get a crush counter, and then safely recall your orb. Or they might block your sweep, walk forward a little bit, block your sweep, you still get an orb recall that is only -5. So you aren't in the worst position from throwing this out, and then your opponent will also start to panic, because for some reason in this game, I shouldn't say for some reason, having the orb behind you is very scary, because it's when Menat starts to open up her main damage routes. So people will panic and they will try to dash or jump at you, which we discussed how to deal with in a previous video when they see this orb out. So if they dash, what I like to do is press stand medium kick immediately after I throw this out, and which then allows me to recover in time to then crouch fierce if they jump, and then I recall my orb like so. Another string we can use with Menat with the 3 lights is crouch light kick, crouch light punch, stand light kick, crouch light punch, light Soul Sphere. So we see that we're +2 after that one, and the orb is so much closer to us, so if our opponent again tries to press a button or dash, and we press medium kick into recall, we get a full combo. And since we're +2, we can actually use our frame advantage for productively. So if our opponent knows we're +2, and they just decide to block, I just got a drill in, and again I'm +2 and even closer, so now if I do decide to, I can throw my opponent. So now you're starting to open up these different realms of Menat to be a little bit more aggressive. So let's look at the different orb strings Menat can do, because I feel like a lot of Menat players don't really know how to set up these different orb strings. So we showed off the 3 lights, but let's look for something that's a little bit more common. So you're gonna poke a lot with crouch medium punch like we discussed, right? So let's say we do crouch medium punch into light sphere. We're +4 at max range. If we're a lot closer, we're -8. So we're starting to see differences in our spacing. If you're new to the game, +4 means that you're at advantage. You can press another button as Menat because you're positive in frames. So it is still your turn if you want to think about it that way. Whereas -8 means that it's your opponent's chance to punish you with a move that they have that is 8 frames or faster. So Laura, for example, could press stand heavy punch and get a huge combo on me for doing a misspaced string. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize here, is how important it is to space your Soul Sphere strings. Tongue twister, sorry about that, but yeah. it's so important to space these Soul Sphere strings. Allow me. It's so important to space these Soul Sphere strings well, because they can be very punishable and detrimental to you, and especially if your opponent knows. So we saw again at max range. Oh, sorry, I used the wrong one. We saw again at max range. We can make it plus. That wasn't quite max range. +3. At the very max range, +6. So we can use these to our advantage. And we talked about drill spacing, remember? So we can use these to auto space our drills if our opponent knows we're plus, or if they want to dash. So it's all about reading your opponent at the end of the day. If you're not too happy on spacing, or you're a lot closer and you want to go for a string, usually you would want to go for something like this. You see, EX, Light Punch, Medium Punch, Soul Sphere always leaves you at +3. So if you want to spend a bar for your string to then frame trap your opponent, then I would recommend using a Light Punch, Medium Punch, EX Soul Sphere, because it is very good for allowing you to maintain keeping pressure on your opponent. And then because the orb is behind them, you notice, remember what we spoke about, and they would panic. And since you're at positive frames, you can then legitimately frame trap against some of these normals that your opponent might press. So I would definitely recommend using these strings to your advantage. But we're going to continue going on through Menat strings, because I also feel like for anyone watching who doesn't play Menat and you want to know what is punishable, I'm going to show you how punishable some of these strings are. So point blank, crouch face into Light Soul Sphere, which is something that Menat players commonly do, because 1, people don't punish it, and 2, it's often the crouch fierce crush counter route that we use. I showed that in a previous video as well on this guide. So what you're going to want to do is, if you see Menat throwing out an orb at close range, usually she's quite punishable, and you might want to test out just how punishable she is at these ranges. So you're seeing Light Punch Sphere at point blank is always -8. Medium Punch Sphere, -11. Heavy Punch Sphere, -4. And then you have EX Soul Sphere, which again is +3. Those are like the 4 main ones Menat players will do. But if they go for, I don't know, let's say they go for this, which is the usual confirm that Menat players go for. Oh, that's -10. So you have to be careful as a Menat player about buffering that, because you can get punished really hard if your opponent does know. And then the final one leaves you at -9. So we're seeing that at point blank, these Soul Spheres are not as strong. People usually let you get away with them because of lack of knowledge due to not many Menat players. But we need to make sure that we're spacing these well. So that's why I recommended using stuff like this, that auto spaces you, so that if you throw out, like say the Light Punch orb, +2, you're going to keep your plus frames. And you can do that quite easily. So let's try and find some auto spacing that will work with Menat. So let's say we use Crouch Medium Kick, right? Crouch Medium Kick is going to be great for starting up your strings with Menat, because as you can see, it's +2 on block. So I like to use Crouch Medium Kick, Crouch Medium Punch, Light Soul Sphere, +1. Or Crouch Medium Kick, Crouch Medium Punch, sorry, not Medium Soul Sphere, Heavy Soul Sphere, because it's only -1. Those are my favorite, like some of my favorite strings to do, apart from the 3 lights that I showed you. I also quite often like to do Crouch Medium Punch into Heavy Soul Sphere from far away. It scares people a lot. And I also would go for a lot of max range buffers like this, because they're only -1 at the very max range, and if your opponent moves into them, you get a full combo of Crouch Medium Punch into medium soul EX Soul Sphere, so Light Punch, Heavy Punch is the input. I would definitely go for those as my like main strings with Menat. And then obviously, if when you want to start incorporating drills, you even get it a little bit better with her strings, because you get in +3 into Crouch Medium Kick, which is a true frame trap on 4 frame characters. And then, as we showed, let me space this again. That was -11. Only -1. 0. So we're gonna see different strings like that from Menat. But what I really want to emphasize here is that you don't want to be doing point blank strings like that, because like if I was to set Laura to do on block stand heavy punch, I would get punished really heavily for that, because that's a heavy normal that she's gonna have buffered behind with a special move that gives her knockdown and frame advantage, which we don't want. We don't want to get caught in that position without our orb. We don't want to get caught in that position with our orb. We want to try and play as perfectly as we possibly can to try and limit the damage we get taken on us. Sorry, let's now go over Menat's orbless strings, because her frame data does change depending on whether you're orb or orbless, right? So let's set up in a way where we can show these off. So as I told you guys, her frame data does differ depending on whether or not she's an orb. So usually a move that's really minor, such as stand medium punch with orb, is now +2 without orb. Stand heavy punch is still -2, but you can cancel this button now, so it makes it a lot better. You're gonna want to try and get safe recalls of these things, like stand medium punch, soul sphere, V skill 2 into recall, which also works with V skill 1, as I will show now. So if I'm to select V skill 1 here, and I'm +4 on the recall if the orb is close. If I'm far away from the orb and I do that, I'm -6 before before the orb reaches back, and then I'm 0 after the recall. So you need to be quite careful with that. You need to be quite careful indeed, because if your opponent does know, they will punish you for it. And at high level play, people do know for the most part. People do know. I think you can get a lot of good strings with orb being out. So like, for example, stand medium kick orb recall leaves you at +7, which then lets you set up either a crouch medium punch frame trap, a throw, or a shinny situation, or even a crouch medium kick if you wanted to, if you think they're gonna walk back or something. You can pretty much frame trap with whatever you want at that point. You're +7, so it then gives you the opportunity to express yourself with Menat. Orbless gives you good strings, it's just that it limits her range a bit. So we're gonna try and find good ways to, you know, go through all of this. So let's try and do more orb recalls of V-skill. So usually you're gonna want to try and V-skill into recall to build as much V-meter as you possibly can safely, because your V-meter allows you to build your V-trigger faster, which then can be a comeback or a closing out mechanic for you. Her V-trigger 1 is very strong. I feel like using these kind of strings for Menat are so helpful. And like, oh, this is another string that people like to use quite a lot with Menat. Sweet recall. Now you saw that I went from -5 very briefly to +9 after the recall. You need to understand that in the time of the recall is your opponent's time to press a 5 frame, 4 frame, or 3 frame button and punish you. But if the orb is really close, they may get punished if they mistime that even slightly, and then you get +9 pressure on block, or on hit, even you get full combos. But if the orb is far away, again, I was -5. So, you know, you have to be very careful. You have to be extremely careful. The further the orb is away from you, the more unsafe your recalls become. And if your opponent picks up on that, that's very dangerous. So, for example, if your orb is all the way away from you, and let's say you try to recall from all the way over here, your opponents would usually try to walk up and throw you or hit you out of it before the orb comes back. Because if you do hit Menat or throw her, then the hitbox that comes back on the orb stops being active, and it acts as if the orb is just an object on the field until it gets back into her hand. So you have to be very careful if you want to keep Menat's orb active. I think that's pretty good for strings. If you guys have any questions that you want to have me answer, please let me know on my Twitch stream, in the comments, Discord, Twitter. Just let me know and I'll try to answer for it for you, either in a bonus video or maybe I'll just answer you directly. But let's move on to the next part. So the next thing I actually want to go over with Menat is game plans. Now, Menat is traditionally thought of as a zoner, and zoners are usually thought of as just to keep out characters. They want to keep you as far away from them and they want to chip away at your life, right? However, you're not always going to be able to play that game plan as Menat. There are going to be times when you're playing matchups where you're required to play very aggressive. There are also going to be times where you're forced to keep your orb, and times where you're forced to release your orb to play the game. So for example, if I'm fighting a character like Zangief wants to just get in and be able to grab me, run his game plan, because he can't fight me at this range. He can't fight me from far away. He has nothing that can damage me. So that means that you'll often find that Zangief players need to find a way to, whether that's jumping, dashing, or doing moves that move him forward, armoring, he needs to find a way to get in. So as Menat, I like to not release my orb unless they're standing completely full screen, and then I like to do stuff like that. Orb throw out, so soul spheres and then explosions to chip away with them. And with Zangief, I find that using her stand heavy kick to anti-air is one of the best normals that she can use, because it's very good at keeping people at distance. So I'm going to show that now. So as you can see, I have Gief set to jump in with jump medium kick, right? Which is a really common normal that Gief players like to jump in with because the hitbox on it is so good, right? So if I'm standing at a range like this, you'll see that my crouch face will trade. But we want to be able to keep Gief at that range where that jump medium kick is not an issue and it won't trade with anti-air. So as you can see, if I'm standing far away and I press stand heavy kick, I have no issue with this button, and I can even get a crush counter and restore him even further away and force him to get in a different way. So using this normal to anti-air is so good against Gief. So you're going to want to use your far zoning normals to be able to keep Gief away. But because of the fact that they added more recovery to stand heavy punch than previous seasons or when Menat was released, it's also risky to just to rely on this button as your only zoning tool, because then if people start to read this and jump, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to a lot of damage that they can take from jumping in on you. So what I like to do against Gief is mix in some of these stand heavy punches with stand medium punch, because it has significantly less recovery and the range on it is very good at keeping Gief at bay, which allows me to then react an anti-air with stand heavy kick if he was to jump in, for example. So that's an example of the orb game plan that I like to use against characters like Zangief, Abigail, pretty much grappling characters that need to try and get in. Even Mika, I think it's really good to play orbs against Mika because it gives you better anti-air options and keep away tools to keep her at bay and keep her from getting in and running her game on you. Because you don't want to get caught orbless against these characters, because it reduces your range significantly and makes them able to sort of keep up with Menat if they knock her down. So you're going to want to be able to keep orb so that you can keep these characters away from you. So you're playing Street Fighter V. You're playing against a character that has a projectile, and they're definitely throwing a lot of projectiles at you. Now you're playing Menat and you have the ability to reflect your projectile. But, as you can see here with characters like Nash, if I reflect my projectile at him, he just absorbs it with his V skill and builds his own V meter. So he's happy to keep throwing his projectile against Menat. So how do we counteract this? So I'm playing against Nash. I throw out my orb projectile, and I'm able to now reflect and absorb his his fireball so that I build my V meter quicker. But also, because my orb is out, if I see him throw another fireball, I can explode my orb and get a knockdown on him. So some matchups such as Guile, Nash, Ryu, you're going to want to use your orbless Menat because it allows you to get access to her V skill 1 absorb, which builds her V meter quicker, and also it scares your opponent into throwing projectiles, because then if you have the orb behind them, then you can explode it and get damage on them, which is very scary to a lot of people. So this forces them to play in a little bit more of an aggressive manner. That's when you can start to use tools such as this. See how I cancelled the V skill into my orb recall? That is just in case Nash decided to throw a fireball and then dash behind or jump. It allowed me to do that. So you're going to want to use Orbless at times to allow you to navigate through fireballs and sort of limit the ways your opponent has to get in. Because it's very annoying to deal with projectiles, especially when you're new at the game. So you're going to want to try and find as many ways as possible to limit the projectile options your opponent has. Some characters do really well with it and other characters don't. Simple, it's a simple thing. And you'll get it the more time you play the game. So while we're on the topic of looking at projectiles and how projectiles can be avoided from Menat, I also wanted to look at just showing you guys some other ways you can avoid projectiles that don't have to necessarily be used with Reflect. So I'm going to show you guys on Gao's slow boom. You see neutral jump is much of an option. If I neutral jump his booms, I can kind of mess up his fireball game a bit. Another option I have here is doing jump drill, which helps me to land quicker. So if I just jump and then drill behind. This is harder to time on slower projectiles like Gao's light boom, but it's very good to use because you can see like I'm not having to deal with these projectiles and I'm landing in time. So for example, if I had Gao set to throw out his boom and then go behind it to get a jump, right? Because Gao might think I'm gonna reflect and then he jumps behind and then I have to block or get punished, right? So if I'm anticipating that Gao's going to do this, I might slide under and then I don't have to deal with his projectile. But that's a read. If he just decides to block, then he'll block my slide and then I can get punished. Or he can even neutral jump and try to get a full jumping punish on my slide. I can also just drill over and you see I avoided him, but he can use a different anti-air normal or jump normal to then air to air me or air throw me. So these are all hard reads that you have to use. You see again, I tried to slide under at a different range. You have to really try and read things like range, positioning, and what your opponent wants to do, and try and make educated reads against your opponent to try and like go against their fireball game. So Menat does have a lot of anti-fireball tools outside of just Reflect, and I wanted to show that off really quickly. The next game plan I want to go over is an aggressive game plan for Menat. So as you can tell, there are other zoning characters in this game, such as Poison, Dalzin, and they're awkward for Menat to fight because they outrange her. So I'm going to show you an example right now. If I set Poison to do this move, and we all know how annoying this move is, we can see that she outranges me, and it's really difficult to deal with, right? I have to try and counter poke her with that, but the risk reward is just not really in my favor, and she's able to outrange me. So the next thing I want to show off is Poison's Crouch Fierce, which is a normal that she has that can be very annoying to deal with. So as you can see, it covers a lot of ground, maybe even more than Menat covers, right? So counter poking her is quite difficult to do because you're not going to be able to reliably whiff punish these consistently. You see I'm trying to space for it. It's very hard to do. I got counter hit for trying, right? So you can see it's kind of annoying for Menat to deal with. So then we have to ask ourselves, how do we approach against these kind of characters? Well, this is when you need to start to use your aggressive tools more, and especially tools like your drill, your orb throw so that you can close space, and being able to dash and jump effectively. So Menat needs to become the aggressor in some matchups. And I want you guys to understand that when you're approaching other zoning characters, you need to be very aware of what their options are, and you need to think as a zoner yourself, because there are going to be many times that you are the Menat player zoning other characters. So now you have to think, the shoes on the other foot. What is my opponent looking out for? So you might remember some of your things where, well, my opponent has shown me he's jumping at me a lot, so now I'm going to try and look for anti-airs. Or my opponent is trying to dash at me a lot, so I'm going to play on the ground and poke a lot more. So this is when you start to observe and go, okay, well, now I can play a little bit more aggressively as Menat. Let me try and mess up my opponent's options. Oh, my opponent is pressing a lot of buttons on the ground. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to use Menat's jump heavy kick, which reaches very far. You can see if I neutral jump at this range here, I will hit Poison because of how far her jump heavy kick goes. it's also very awkward for most characters to anti it. If I go in with a drill like this, even though I misspaced it, I closed the space quite a lot. Oh, I spaced it right from almost 3/4 of the screen and I've got +7 and I'm in. So you're going to want to alter your approaches a lot. And you may even decide, okay, well, I'm going to toss out my orb and then I'm going to try and follow behind it while my opponent's scared and then get full damage like that, full combo. You can play very aggressively as this character as well. So I don't want you guys to get the false perception that Menat can only be played as a zoner. She can also play in an aggressive way depending on the character she's fighting against. And there are going to be matchups where you need to play a bit more aggressively. To name some, Poison, Dulcim, in my opinion, Bulk, Jury, I think you need to play quite aggressively against. So I would like you guys to understand that with this character, you need to structure your matchup game plans in a way where sometimes you're playing with your orb and you're trying to zone them out. Sometimes you're playing without your orb and you're trying to just absorb projectiles and force them into coming in. And then sometimes you're playing aggressively where you mix in orb and orbless to be able to pressure your opponent. Because most of your best block strings don't come from your orb, they come from being orbless. Such as something like that. You don't get that if you just stay orb the entire time. So you need to play a bit orbless. So that's going to do it for game plans. If you guys have any more questions on that, or you want me to elaborate a bit further, please hit me up and let me know, and I will try to explain it for you or make a bonus video.